Hello, today is Friday, January 30th. Welcome to episode 551 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Senior Fellow Morgan Vinia. I'm joined today by founder and executive director Jamil Jaffer and NSI Senior Fellows Jessica Jones and Matt Hayden. Y'all, welcome to the Friday podcast. We haven't talked about Iran in a hot minute, so we're going to talk updates here. Protests in Iran do continue as the regime attempts to suppress dissent with mass violence. We've seen anywhere from 6,000 to reportedly 37,000 protesters killed. Around 42,000 protesters are reportedly detained. The regime has blocked out internet now for about a month, so we don't actually have a very clear picture as to what's going on the ground. However, reportedly there are protests in about 200 cities, and opposition remains strong despite this massive crackdown. We have seen that the regime double down on their support for the Ayatollah in recent days. The regime, of course, has issued tough warnings to the United States should President Trump take offensive action against Iran. For its part, the United States, has announced that we will be conducting military exercises in the region. The USS Abraham Lincoln has moved to the CENTCOM AOR and is supposedly ready for action. Yesterday, our European partners decided to step up and designate the IRGC as a designated foreign terrorist organization. Better late than never. They also sanctioned a number of IRGC officials and entities. Yesterday, at the premiere of Melania, President Trump came out saying that he is demanding his 2 major demands. First is that the Iranian regime abandon their nuclear weapons program. And then the second, of course, is that they stop killing protesters. With that said, it's not really clear as to what the president's next steps are. He says that he is in touch with the Iranians. What that looks like, we don't know. But the big question here is, what are we doing here? We've seen these protests continue for, over a month now, almost 2 months, and we don't really see any aggressive or offensive action taken by the United States to weaken the regime and back the protesters. So, big question, Jessica, going to you first here. Is this just another massive Iranian protest that's going to fizzle out because it doesn't have the support of the international community, and namely the United States?
I think, Morgan, the folks on the show seemed pretty confident a few weeks ago that action might happen, right? We thought it was imminent. We picked it as a topic because we who knows what the headlines will be by tomorrow morning, right? Maybe you, Morgan. And President Trump came out really strongly against the regime and said, if you continue to crack down on protesters, something bad's going to happen to you, right? Like in hallmark President Trump language. And then, as you point out, nothing happened. I think, he claimed kind of a victory saying that executions had stopped. And the reports indicate there might have been, some conversations and pressure from neighbors in the region worried about kind of instability in the region if the regime were to collapse. So he walked it back a bit. But as you said, the reality is there are still protesters being killed. And President Trump and the Iranian regime continues to sound out their own threats, like don't take action, we will bite back, right? And I will say, on the heels of Venezuela and Maduro, they should not be chomping at the bit with President Trump. He clearly, as we know, likes to take forceful, directed, limited action, right? Like he wants a victory and he's going to find one where he can, right? I think they're thumbing their nose at him, and I think they're going to be surprised that he might bite back. There's stories about, visits from Saudi officials, again, trying to walk President Trump maybe back, de-escalate the situation a bit. They're, of course, worried about instability, economic, political, spillover effects if the regime were to collapse. But I think it might be harder now. A few weeks in, the president hasn't seen changes from the regime. Protesters are still being killed. I think he might be leaning towards action. I'm not Polly Markets, so I can't make a prediction. Checked it. I think Matt and I checked it this morning. The odds are high in a couple weeks that something's going to happen. But I think President Trump's instinct for action, for limited action, and for some kind of to find a success in there, it's going to win out in the end here.
All right, Jamil, just because we're not seeing any major action taking place by this administration right now doesn't mean that nothing is necessarily happening behind the scenes. What's your assessment? What's your take here?
Well, look, I mean, it's true. There might be some happening behind the scenes, but it doesn't matter because President Trump decided to go out there early and come after the regime and say, "I'm going to do something about it." As Jessica said, he told the protesters help is coming. Well, turns out help wasn't on the way. I mean, it's a total clown show. This is exactly the problem with when you make policy by tweet. If the president wants to do something, he needs to act effectively. The problem is he's back in the position of being Barack Obama and Joe Biden, making promises, not upholding them. Now, if he wants to strike, he should do it soon because the protests are eventually going to peter out. Part of the problem too is we're not sending material as far as you can tell from the outside. The protesters don't all of a sudden have weapons. They don't all of a sudden have better communication. They don't seem better coordinated. We could be pumping all that in. And by the way, we don't have to even strike Iran to be effective. We need to empower the protesters, but it doesn't seem like we're doing that either. And by the way, we should be doing it publicly. What is the downside to supporting them publicly, getting out there and saying, we're sending them weapons, we're sending them capabilities? Like, let's do that. And the problem is, President Trump is unwilling to do that. If we are doing some sort of covert action or negotiating behind the scenes, neither one appears to be working effectively, and it's undermining the president's credibility. So if he wants to retain credibility, he needs to act soon or stop making policy by tweet. Just pick one and do that.
All right. Strong words from our executive director here. Matt Hayden.
This is how Jamil points me in this direction.
This is when he goes, "You're fired."
He's like, all right, Matt's next.
Fired.
So one of the objectives of this administration is largely to give policy by tweet, because if past actions and reactions are to be used as a report card, then the assumption is that if the president says, "We've got you," if this gets worse, that alone is going to add some pressure to the Iranian government to stop killing protesters. And so that appears to be the original instinct. It wasn't, hey, we've got 100 cruise missiles pointed at you. If you kill another protester, we're hitting the button. It was, more will come, there will be consequences. And the hope was that this strategy would at least cause a little bit of a reprisal of the activity. We were assured it was. That doesn't mean it did. With the media blackout and the internet blackout, it does make all those fact findings terrible. It doesn't mean that they're not slaughtering protesters. It also doesn't mean there's unicorns in the street. So we have a challenge of truth on the ground. As far as covert actions, I still have a lot of faith that we are at least getting insights and intel, and that candidly, the Qatari relationship, wherever it may be at the moment, has been pretty good at keeping that red phone open. So when the president says, "I'm talking to the Iranians," you really feel like he's basically got a Qatari official that's playing the telephone game back and forth. We were joking about the polymarket thing, but people at the Pentagon got to feed kids too. So we're keeping an eye out for spikes. Right now, it doesn't look like we're going to have anything this weekend. But that doesn't mean that there isn't going to be something that flags it. What's interesting about the Iranian escalatory activity, or at least the perceived escalatory activity, is it seems to be a multitude of little things as opposed to taking one thing that they're opposed to and being very big about it. So, for example, keeping the nuclear folks out from investigating, keeping their exercises going in maritime environments, keeping the protests quiet by the media blackout, but at the same time, not literally amplifying each one on their own, but causing this myriad of challenges to where it doesn't by itself look like you're poking the president and candidly the EU in the eye. And so you have this weird world right now where there's almost somebody waiting for somebody to step on a stick and it to crack, there would be a further action. And so while I would not in any way say the situation is good or tenable in what's going on over there, I would say that there appears to be a let's see if something else happens, because in the eyes of the administration, the feedback on less protesters being taken out and the push for nuclear inspectors to get in is proceeding, albeit probably in a negative to a neutral pace. That's what they're watching for, some spike, some pushback, and then it will be likely a just as was said before, a pushed attack on a strategic asset or something that is a quick, bright flash, like don't do that again. And so that's what we're watching out for, at least from my perspective. That's what we're seeing with the diplomacy by tweet as well as diplomacy by force projection that's in the area.
Yeah. So look, President Trump has proven himself in the region that you F around, you find out. I think we did
Now, Morgan, only if it's easy, right? President Trump has only said it's only done it when it's an easy
Midnight
shot, right?
Hammer was not easy. That was a hell of an
On
operation.
Qasem Soleimani on a runway, right? After the Israelis had wiped out all the Iranian air defenses, then we sent a bunch of B-2 bombers over. I mean, come on. We only do it when it's an easy, when we know we can get an easy win. That's fine, but like, let's take an easy win. We did Maduro. It was a fairly easy win. Let's do an easy win here. He just isn't doing it. He just won't pull the trigger. You know why? The real truth is that it isn't President Trump. It's all those people in his administration who don't want to upset the Qataris, who don't want to upset the Emiratis, who don't want to upset the Saudis. Here's the thing. The Saudis and Emiratis are on our team. Let's do the job. Let's get it done. Whether we use their airspace or not, too bad. We should make it happen. This is our one opportunity. President Obama messes up. President Biden messes up. This is President Trump's opportunity.
All right, that was one interruption. Let's see if I can get through my comments without being interrupted again. Thank you, Jamil. Look, President Trump, as I said, has proven himself in the region. He's not afraid to take offensive action against the Iranians. With that said, though, we do have we have a window of opportunity here to actually make a significant impact in moving the needle when it comes to supporting the protesters. We thought we were going to see that momentum was building, and it's unclear as to how long these protesters can hang on. As we've seen in the past, when help didn't come, they petered out, and a lot of people lost their lives for a cause that unfortunately, never materialized with the regime collapsing. And so right now, President Trump has moved assets to the region. We're posturing in all of the ways that one would expect for us to take offensive action. But with that said, nothing's happening yet. And my question is for the administration, what happens if you move all these assets to the region, you talk this big talk, and then you do nothing, and then there are no results and the protests peter out? So I think that, frankly, is the big risk here, and could potentially undermine this administration's credibility in the region. So with that said, that is a wrap. Thanks, as always, to Kelly Crowley, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us on Monday, February 2nd, for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart, fast on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. We're on YouTube, so check out our channel for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.